Off of back-to-back Super Bowls, Patrick Mahomes said something reckless.
We're doing it. 3 times, first time in NFL history, we doing it.
But to be fair, he wasn't completely out of line to think this. And to fully understand why he was so confident, we have to go back to February of 2023, because that's where this story really starts. The 2022 Eagles were a legitimate monster of a football team that finished the year 14-3. Jalen Hurts ended up second in MVP voting right behind Patrick Mahomes, and they walked into Super Bowl 57 looking like the more complete roster on paper. Their offense could run it or throw it at will, and the defense racked up 70 sacks during the regular season. This wasn't a squad that snuck into the big game by accident. They earned their spot by dominating everyone in their path. The first half of that Super Bowl backed up the hype as the Eagles came out and punched the Chiefs right in the mouth. Jalen Hurts was rushing for touchdowns while the defense suffocated the Kansas City offense, and by the time they headed to the locker room, Philadelphia held a 24-14 lead. But the real thing that mattered was the health of the quarterback. Patrick had clearly re-injured his ankle right before halftime, and seeing the league's best player limping into the tunnel down 10 points made the game feel like it was already over. Unfortunately for me, it wasn't. Andy Reid made his adjustments, and Mahomes looked like a completely different player when he stepped back onto the field for the second half. Kansas City started moving the ball like the injury never happened, putting together 3 straight touchdown drives to open the third and fourth quarters. Just like that, the double-digit deficit was gone and the Chiefs had snatched the lead away. Now here's where it gets interesting because the Eagles actually had multiple chances to win this game. They managed to tie it up late, and Jalen Hurts was playing out of his mind at this time. He set the Super Bowl record for rushing yards by a QB and scored 3 times on the ground while finishing with over 300 yards through the air. For most of that night, he was the best player on the field, but 2 specific plays in the fourth quarter changed the course of NFL history. The first blow was a 65-yard punt return by Kadarius Toney that completely flipped the field. It became the longest punt return in Super Bowl history, and suddenly the Chiefs had a short field and the lead. A few plays later, Mahomes hit Sky Moore for a touchdown to go up by 8, and that punt return changed everything. Then, with 2 minutes left and the game tied at 35, James Bradberry was called for a holding on Juju Smith-Schuster on a crucial 3rd down. Bradberry was honest about it after the game, admitting he grabbed the jersey and was just hoping the ref would let it slide. The flag came out, which gave Kansas City a fresh set of downs to run the clock down to 8 seconds before Harrison Butker nailed the game winner. Patrick finished 21-27 for 182 yards and 3 TDs despite playing on a bad ankle. He walked away with the championship, and he became the first player since Kurt Warner in 1999 to win both the regular season MVP and the Super Bowl MVP in the same year, something even Tom Brady never did. That win confirmed a dangerous belief for the Chiefs. It told them that no matter what happened, whether they were down by 10 points or their QB was hurt, they would always find a way to win. That confidence wasn't arrogance yet because they had earned every bit of it on the field. But when belief gets tested and survives like that, it starts to feel like destiny. And destiny makes you stop worrying about the opponent in front of you. That was the seed planted in February 2023 in Glendale, Arizona. And it took just 2 more years for the consequences to fully grow. Fast forward to November 2023, and the Eagles are sitting at 9-1 as one of the most dangerous teams in football. They travel to Arrowhead for a showdown against the Chiefs, but Kansas City looks a bit different this time around. At 7-3, they're definitely a solid group, but they aren't playing like the unstoppable machine everyone usually fears. The Eagles walked away with a 21-17 win. Jalen Hurts used his legs to punch in 2 touchdowns while the defense stepped up and held Patrick Mahomes to just 177 passing yards. Late in the game, the Chiefs had a real chance to take the lead, but Marquez Valdes-Scantling dropped a pass that hit him right in the hands. That single mistake killed the drive and allowed Philly to hold on for the victory. Now, the Chiefs and their fans had a very specific way of looking at this loss, and to be fair, their logic made some sense. They claimed the game didn't really matter that much because it was just a mid-season matchup where division leaders don't always bring their A game. The narrative was that the Chiefs always figured it out by January, so everyone should just move on. They weren't wrong about the standings either because Kansas City still won the AFC West and secured their playoff seeding. But here's the thing that the "it doesn't matter" crowd completely missed. For the Eagles, this win represented something much bigger than a notch in the win column. It wasn't necessarily proof that they were the better team overall, but it was proof that they finally had a blueprint to work with. They figured out how to make Pat look uncomfortable in the pocket, and they saw firsthand that their defensive front could actually get to him. Philly realized their rushing attack could shorten the game and keep the most dangerous quarterback in the world on the sideline. While the Chiefs completely dismissed it as a fluke, the Eagles filed it away as a roadmap for the future. The irony is that both teams looked at the same 60 minutes of football and walked away with completely opposite conclusions. By the time both teams started heading in different directions over the next few months, they were carrying very different mindsets. The Chiefs had their usual confidence, but the Eagles had a plan they knew could work. Of course, as the rest of 2023 played out, it started to look like none of that was going to matter anyway though. This is where the story really splits into two different worlds. Right after that big win at Arrowhead, the Eagles went back home and completely fell apart. They dropped 5 of their final 8 games as the offense went cold and the defense started giving up points in bunches. They finished the year at 11-6, which might look okay on paper, but it was a disaster for a roster that had started 10-1 and had won 14 games the year before that. They let Drew Lock walk them down for a game winner. The season ended with a 32-9 embarrassment against the Buccaneers in the wildcard round, and it wasn't even a competitive fight. Hurts looked rattled from the start, the play calling was lifeless, and the game was basically over by half. The defense turned into a massive liability down the stretch. They ended the year ranked 30th in points allowed, which is staggering for a unit that was the most feared group in the league just a season prior. The secondary was getting carved up every single week, and the pass rush that used to dominate games just disappeared. If you were watching from the outside, you had to wonder if that 2022 Super Bowl run was just a one-year wonder for a group that couldn't sustain their own success. The Chiefs, on the other hand, were busy doing exactly what they always do. Their 2023 regular season wasn't a masterpiece by any stretch of the imagination. They weren't blowing people out of the stadium, and there were plenty of weeks where the offense looked totally stuck. It felt like they were running on fumes because the weapons around Mahomes weren't producing, but they kept grinding out close wins anyway, all while leading the league in drops. When the playoffs arrived, they fought their way to the Super Bowl in Las Vegas to face the 49ers. San Francisco was actually the favorite in that game because they had the better roster and the more explosive offense. For about 3 quarters, it really looked like the 49ers were the better team on the field. The Chiefs were trailing heading into the 4th, but eventually forced it to OT, where San Fran had multiple opportunities to put the game away. They just couldn't finish the job. Mahomes put the team on his back and engineered a legendary game-winning drive in overtime to win 25-22. That victory gave them back-to-back Super Bowl titles, making them the first team to pull that off since the Patriots did it back in 03 and 04. During the victory parade in Kansas City, Mahomes grabbed the mic and told the world exactly what was next. They were going to three-peat. The entire organization started leaning into that goal immediately. Chris Jones was leading chants about a 3rd straight ring, and the media started talking about Mahomes chasing down Tom Brady's legacy. It was the birth of the greatest dynasty in modern football history, and the narrative was set before the 2024 season even had a schedule. While all that celebrating was happening in Kansas City, the people in Philly were watching closely. They hadn't forgotten about that November game or the blueprint they discovered at Arrowhead. They spent the entire offseason working on a project that the Chiefs were too busy to notice. The Eagles were rebuilding their own identity with a very specific target in mind, and they were doing it with more focus than anyone had realized. Philly didn't waste any time, and the first thing that they did was tear down and fix up that broken defense. They didn't just tinker around the edges or make minor depth signings because they went out and grabbed Vic Fangio to run the entire unit as defensive coordinator. If you aren't a diehard fan, you need to know that Fangio spent 3 years leading the Broncos from 2019 to 2021. During that stretch of time, his schemes gave Patrick Mahomes more headaches than almost any other coach in the entire league. He never actually managed to beat Kansas City on the scoreboard, but his defensive shells consistently forced Mahomes to work twice as hard for every single yard. The Chiefs knew his name and they certainly respected his system, and now he was in Philly building a roster specifically designed to hunt them down in February. The front office also brought in Kellen Moore to take over the offense after the unit stalled out and looked completely lost during the 2023 collapse. This meant new voices and fresh ideas were entering the building, creating a complete reset on both sides of the ball for a team that desperately needed it. The Eagles then would sign Zach Bond and draft 2 stud rookie cornerbacks, but the biggest move they made changed everything. Saquon Barkley walked away from the New York Giants, which was the only NFL home he'd ever known, and signed a 3-year deal in Philly worth over $37 million. Saquon was 27 years old and finally healthy, and he chose a rival team because he believed they gave him the best chance to win a ring right now. The Giants weren't willing to pay him what he was worth on the open market, but the Eagles saw the value and pulled the trigger. The second that contract was signed, the entire identity of this offense shifted from a finesse passing team to a physical downhill rushing attack. The thing is, the Eagles didn't exactly come out the gates looking like a juggernaut. They sat at 2-2 through the first month of the season, and plenty of people were asking if these massive changes were actually going to pay off in the long run. The defense looked shaky and disjointed early on, while the offense was still trying to find its rhythm, with so many new pieces in the huddle. It honestly felt like this group might be a year away from truly competing for a title. Then Saquon Barkley decided to take over the league. What we saw in the back half of the season was a different level of football. Week after week, Barkley was shredding through defenses like they weren't even standing there, using that elite acceleration to break tackles and make defenders look silly in the open field. He finished the regular season with 2,005 rushing yards on 345 carries, which gave him a massive average of 5.8 yards every time he touched the ball. Putting up the 2,000-yard season is legendary stuff, and only 8 other players in the history of the NFL have ever reached that milestone before him. He even managed to hit that number while only playing 16 games because the Eagles had already locked up their playoff spot and let him rest for the finale. While Saquon was dominating, the defense was undergoing a massive transition of its own. Fangio's system finally clicked into place as the young talent started to grow right up in front of our eyes. Players like Jalen Carter and Zach Bond began playing at an all-pro level, while rookie cornerbacks Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean looked like seasoned veterans by November. By the time the regular season wrapped up, Philly's defense was ranked first in yards allowed and second in points allowed across the entire league. If you go back and look at those 2023 games, that unit was 30th in points allowed, so moving into the top 2 just 1 year later is a total defensive masterclass. The Eagles finished the year 14-3 and looked unstoppable. They absolutely demolished Washington 55-23 in the NFC Championship game. And between Barkley running wild and the defense suffocating the Commanders, the game was over by the end of the third. It wasn't just a win for Philly, it was a loud statement to the rest of the league that they were peaking at the perfect moment. So as the Super Bowl approached, you had 2 different stories unfolding at the exact same time. On one side, you had a team that saw its weaknesses in 2023 and fixed them with surgical precision by adding a generational talent and a coordinator who knew exactly how to slow down the Chiefs. On the other side, you had a defending champion that was still riding the wave of momentum and believing that their January magic would save them whenever things got tough. Both of these teams were on a collision course for New Orleans. However, only one of them had spent the last 12 months building a roster specifically to win this one game. The Chiefs finished 2024 with a 15-2 record, and if you look at the standings, it looks like a year of dominance. They earned the number 1 seed in the AFC and seemed to have a clear path to becoming the first team ever to win 3 Super Bowls in a row. But the record didn't actually match the eye test when you sat down and watched them play. Kansas City ended up winning 12 games by a single score that season. They were a team that was surviving by the skin of their teeth and getting lucky breaks every single week, ranging from opponents missing chip shot field goals to fumbles bouncing perfectly back into Mahomes' hands at the right time. Other teams had the Chiefs on the ropes constantly, but they couldn't finish the job, and those mistakes kept adding up in Kansas City's favor. The offense was also a shell of what we've come to expect from a Reid and Mahomes pairing. Rashee Rice was their most reliable target, but he went down with a knee injury in week 4 and missed the rest of the year. Isaiah Pacheco also went to the sideline with a broken fibula in week 2. And the situation at left tackle was so bad that both the starter and backup eventually got benched for poor play. The Chiefs had to scramble and patch the roster together with older veterans like DeAndre Hopkins and Kareem Hunt. These guys were fine contributors, but they weren't the kind of explosive weapons that keep defensive coordinators awake at night. The offense actually finished 15th in scoring, which means the Chiefs were a middle-of-the-pack unit being carried by a great defense and a QB who just refused to lose in the fourth quarter. But once the playoffs started, the Chiefs found that extra gear they always seem to have. They took care of the Texans and then outlasted the Bills in a brutal AFC Championship game, where Mahomes played just well enough to move the chains. That win over Buffalo convinced everyone that the regular season struggles didn't matter anymore. The narrative was that this team was simply built to flip a switch when the lights were the brightest, and since they'd done it before, everyone assumed they'd just do it again. The media hype surrounding this run was unlike anything we've seen in sports. Every single pregame show and sports column was framing this game as the moment Mahomes would officially pass Tom Brady as the greatest of all time. People were talking about the three-peat and the greatest dynasty in the history at full volume. The Chiefs were the betting favorites heading into New Orleans, and it felt like the script was already written for one more legendary comeback and one more red and gold celebration. The problem was that nobody was taking the Eagles seriously enough during the 2-week build-up. Philly got some basic respect because they won 14 games and had Saquon Barkley, but the conversation always drifted back to the Chiefs and their place in history. It felt like the Eagles were just a secondary character in someone else's movie, but on February 9, 2025, in the city of New Orleans, that Chiefs' destiny finally ran out of luck. The Eagles didn't waste any time and put points on the board during their second possession of the game. Jalen Hurts kept the ball himself for a classic tush push from the 1-yard line, and that play gave Philly exactly the kind of physical downhill tone they wanted to set. They came out looking to control the line of scrimmage and force the Chiefs to find an answer, but Kansas City couldn't. Everything started falling apart for the Chiefs on the offensive line, and the situation never improved as the game went on. Philly was only rushing 4 defenders, yet those 4 guys were getting to Mahomes cleanly on every single snap. There were no exotic blitzes or complex schemes needed because Jalen Carter and Josh Sweat were just physically better than the players trying to block them. We saw the Chiefs' offensive line struggle with consistency all season long, and in the biggest game of the year, that weakness finally caught up to them in the worst possible way. The pressure was relentless as Mahomes was sacked 6 times and hit 11 times throughout the afternoon. He couldn't step up to find a throwing lane because there was no pocket to step up into, and he couldn't use his legs to buy time because the defender was usually in his face before he could even reset his feet. Vic Fangio spent 3 years in Denver trying to build a defensive masterpiece that he never quite finished, but he finally completed that vision in one dominant afternoon in New Orleans. The Chiefs managed to pick up only 1 first down in the entire first half, which is a staggering stat for an offense led by Pat Mahomes. Their total output through 2 quarters was just 23 yards. It's To put that into perspective, the only team to record fewer yards in the first half of the Super Bowl was the 1985 Patriots, while they were being dismantled by that legendary Bears defense. The Eagles managed to match that level of dominance without a single Hall of Fame lock on the roster, relying instead on a front four that simply outworked everyone in front of them. 2 massive interceptions made the mountain even harder for Kansas City to climb. The first one came when a rookie Cooper DeJean during his birthday stepped in front of a pass in a tight window and took it 38 yards back for a score. The second came from Zach Bond, the linebacker Howie Roseman signed on a cheap 1-year deal who played at an all-pro level. He jumped a route to set the Eagles up deep in the Chiefs' territory right before half. By the time the teams headed to the locker room at halftime, the score sat at a lopsided 24-0. Patrick admitted after the game that he knew what the Eagles were doing, but he couldn't find a way to adjust his play style. Philly was sitting back in coverage and taking away the easy underneath throws, essentially daring him to be patient and take what the defense gave him. The game eventually hit 34-0 and reached 40-0 before the Eagles finally pulled back in garbage time and put in the bench. At that point, it didn't even feel like a competitive football game anymore. It felt like a demonstration of power. Travis Kelce finished the day with only 4 catches for 39 yards, which stands as his worst statistical performance in a Super Bowl. When you look at the final line for Mahomes, he went 21 of 32 for 257 yards with 3 TDs and 2 picks. Those touchdowns are pretty misleading because they came late in the fourth quarter when the game was already over. It's a bit ironic that Andy Reid's own philosophy on winning in the trenches was used against him by the general manager he mentored. Howie Roseman learned the importance of the line of scrimmage from Reid, but he took those lessons and built a roster that was even more physically imposing. He pointed that strength directly at the man who used that same formula to win 3 rings, and the result was a total blowout. Patrick Mahomes earned every bit of the confidence he carries into every game. That part of his legacy is undeniable. But somewhere between the victory parade and the following February, the belief that the Chiefs would always find a way to win stopped being an advantage and started being a blindfold. The Eagles didn't just stumble into a Super Bowl victory, they spent years studying the Chiefs and rebuilt their entire defensive identity around stopping them. Mahomes will definitely be back in the hunt soon enough, but this game serves as a loud reminder in the NFL. The moment you think the story's finished, someone's already working on the rewrite. So there you have it. Watch this next video if you haven't already, and subscribe if you're new. Thanks for watching.